Nationalism in India. This is our new chapter from history. The chapter has 4 main topics and each topic has some subtopics. So let us start with the introduction first. We know that modern nationalism in Europe was associated with the formation of nation states. It also meant change in people's understanding of who they were and what defined their identity and sense of belonging. New symbols and icons, new songs and ideas forged new links and redefined the boundaries of communities. In most countries, the making of these national or new national identity was a long process. But how did the spirit of nationalism emerge in India? This is our first question from the topic. In India, the growth of modern nationalism is intimately connected to the anti-colonial movement. People began discovering their unity in the process of their struggle with colonialism. The sense of being oppressed under colonialism provided a shared bond that tied many different groups together. But each class and group felt the effects of colonialism differently. Their experiences were varied and their notions of freedom were not always the same. The Congress under Mahatma Gandhi tried to forge these groups together within one movement, but the unity did not emerge without conflict. In this chapter, we will pick up the story from 1920s and study the non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement. We will also explore how the Congress sought to develop the national movement, how different social groups participated in the movement, and how nationalism captured the imagination of people. The First World War, Khilafat and non-cooperation movement. So let us begin our first topic, but note down a question for this topic. How the First World War created a new economic situation in India. After 1919, the national movement spread to new areas, incorporating new social groups and developing new modes of struggle. First of all, the war created a new economic and political situation. It led to a huge increase in defense expenditure, which was financed by war loans and increasing tax. Custom duties were raised and income tax was introduced. Through the war years, prices doubled between 1913 and 1918, leading to extreme hardship of the common people. Villages were called upon to supply soldiers, and the forced recruitment in rural areas caused widespread anger. Then in 1918 and 1919 and 1920 to 21, crops failed in many parts of India, resulting in acute shortages of food. This was accompanied by an influenza epidemic. According to the census of 1921, 12 to 13 million people perished as a result of famines and the epidemic. Okay, so now let us move on to the first subtopic of the first point, that is the idea of Satyagraha. Note down the first question of this topic. What is meant by the idea of Satyagraha? Mahatma Gandhi returned to India in January 1915. He had come from South Africa, where he had successfully fought the racist regime with a novel method of mass agitation, which he called Satyagraha. The idea of Satyagraha emphasized the power of truth and the need to search for truth. It suggested that if the cause was true, if the struggle was against injustice, then physical force was not necessary to fight the oppressor. Without seeking vengeance or being aggressive, a Satyagrahi could win the battle through nonviolence. This could be done by appealing to the conscience of the oppressor. People had to persuaded to see the truth. instead of being forced to accept truth through the use of violence. By this struggle, truth was bound to ultimately triumph. Mahatma Gandhi believed that this dharma of non-violence could unite all Indians. Now, the second question from the topic is, which are the Satyagraha movements started by Gandhi or Mahatma Gandhi after arriving in India? After arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi successfully organized Satyagraha movements in various places. In 1917, he traveled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire the peasants to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. Then in 1917, he organized a Satyagraha to support the peasants of Kheda district of Gujarat. Affected by crop failure and plague epidemic, the peasants of Kheda could not pay the revenue and were demanding that revenue collection be relaxed. In 1918, Mahatma Gandhi went to Ahmedabad to organize a Satyagraha movement against or amongst cotton mill workers. So that's all from the second part of the question. Now we are moving on to the second subtopic of this first point. It is the Rowlatt Act. This topic has few questions. Take a note of the first question. What was Rowlatt Act? How did it affect the national movement? Rowlatt Act was codified in the year 1919. This act gave the government or the police enormous powers to repress political activities and allow detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. Mahatma Gandhi wanted non-violent civil disobedience against such unjust laws, so he called for a hartal on 6th April. Rallies were organized in various cities. Workers went on strike in railway workshops and shops were closed down. Now the second question that arises is, what did the British do to suppress the Rowlatt Satyagraha? Alarmed by the popular upsurge and scared that lines of communication such as the railways and telegraph could be disrupted, the British administration decided to clamp down on nationalists. So local leaders were picked up from Amritsar, and Mahatma Gandhi was barred from entering Delhi. On 10th April, the police in Amritsar fired upon a peaceful procession, provoking widespread attacks on banks, post offices and railway stations. Then martial law was imposed and General Dyer took command. After this, another question which arises is, what was Jallianwala Bagh incident? So on 13th April, the infamous Jallianwala Bagh incident took place. On that day, a large crowd gathered in the enclosed ground of Jallianwala Bagh. Some came to protest against the government's new repressive measures. Others had come to attend the annual Baisakhi fair. Being from outside the city, many villagers were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. Dyer entered the area, blocked the exit points, and opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds. His object, as he declared later, was to produce a moral effect, to create in the minds of Satyagrahis a feeling of terror and awe. We came to one more question, that is, what was the reaction of the people and the government to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre? As the news of Jallianwala Bagh spread, crowds took to the streets in many North Indian towns. There were strikes, clashes with the police, and attacks on government buildings. The government responded with brutal repression, seeking to humiliate and terrorize people. Satyagrahis were forced to rub their noses on the ground, crawl on the streets, and to salute all the sahibs, the police personnels. People were flogged and villages were bombed. The Rowlatt Satyagraha was a widespread movement, but it was still limited mostly to the cities and towns. Seeing violence spread, Mahatma Gandhi called off the movement. Take a note of another question that arises at this point. What was the Khilafat movement? The First World War had ended with the defeat of Ottoman Turkey, and there were rumors that a harsh peace treaty was going to be imposed on the Ottoman Emperor, the spiritual head of the Islamic world, who is also known as the Khalifa. To defend the Khalifa's temporal powers, a Khilafat committee was formed in Bombay in March 1919. Mahatma Gandhi now felt that the need to launch a more broad-based movement in India, but he was certain that no such movement could be organized without bringing the Hindus and Muslims closer or together. One way of doing this, he felt, was to take up the Khilafat issue. Two brothers, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, began discussing with Mahatma Gandhi about the possibility of united mass action on the issue. Gandhiji saw this as an opportunity to bring Muslims under the umbrella of a unified national movement. At the Calcutta session of the Congress in September 1920, he convinced other leaders of the need to start a non-cooperation movement in support of Khilafat as well as for Swaraj. Moving on to our new subtopic of the first point, that is, why non-cooperation? Let us begin with a question. How could non-cooperation become a movement? In Gandhiji's book Hind Swaraj, written during 1909, declared that British rule was established in India because we cooperate with them, and had survived only because of this cooperation. If Indians refused to cooperate, British rule in India would collapse within a year, and Swaraj would come. Gandhiji proposed that the movement should unfold in stages. It should begin with the surrender of titles that the government awarded and a boycott of civil services, army, police, courts, and legislative council, schools, and foreign goods. Then, in case of the government use repression, a full civil disobedience campaign would be launched. Through the summer of 1920, Mahatma Gandhi and Shaukat Ali toured extensively, mobilizing popular support for the movement. The Congress were reluctant to boycott the council elections, which were scheduled for November 1920, and they feared that movement might lead to popular violence. There was an intense tussle within the Congress. Finally, at the Congress session at Nagpur in December 1920, a compromise was worked out and the non-cooperation program was adopted. With this, we are done with the first topic of the chapter. Stay tuned for the next topic. Thank you for watching.